Welcome to our Awe and Wonder AAC podcast from the Special Education Technology Center. We're here in Series 2, Leaders and Changemakers. I'm Sarah Kinsella,
And I'm Brenda Del Monte.
and we are so excited to have Jane Farrall, the Jane Farrall, with us today. This is a really exciting interview for us. We're going to start with Jane. We know you, we love your work, and we think a lot of people who will be listening will also know you. But for those who maybe don't, can you just give us a little idea of who you are and what you do, and also
Sure.
where you live, because we're in all different places.
I was about to start with, I have a slightly different accent. So, yes, I'm an Australian. I live in a wine region called the Barossa outside of Adelaide, in a little old stone cottage, 160 years old. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's beautiful. I am a speech pathologist, first of all. I started working as a speech pathologist over 30 years ago, and we say speech pathologist, not speech language pathologist, so excuse me for
Okay.
that. I started working over 30 years ago and very quickly became interested in AAC, and that led to my interest in literacy. And for the past 11 years, I have worked for myself as a consultant. I work with schools across Australia, and I do workshops and conferences and things all over the world.
Mhm.
And I have a blog where I write what I think. At the time, I'm not very regular with it. And yeah, I have a huge passion for both literacy and AAC.
Right. That's evident from everything we see from your blog. And what's the name of your blog so people can find it?
It's very boring, janefarrell.com.
That makes it easy. That
Yeah.
makes it easy.
Jane,
I came across your blog. I think it was 2017 when word wall stuff came out, and there was printables, and I was a crazy person printing and laminating and doing all this stuff. And I remember because mom was spelled mum, right, in that
Yes.
handout. But one thing I've always appreciated about you is you are so rich and generous with your resources. So you create a resource. Actually, it was probably before 2017, because I think I came across you when I was trying to find a list of switch access to the iPad, kind of before switch access was a thing. So you had to know that the app had internal switch access. Of course, even now you can't search Apple and say switch access and get anything that speaks our language. But I remember finding you. So that was like maybe 2011 or so. But it was somewhere in there where it was like, oh my gosh, she just did all this work. She just found all the apps that work with switch access. I love this person, and I didn't have to pay. You updated it regularly so many times, and I was like, I love this. And that is something right off the bat that I feel like I learned from you and attempt to emulate in my whole practice. I'm also in private practice, and it's like, if I have the information, I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to try to figure out a way to share that with you. And it is so hard to get the information out. I'm not going to make this even harder by having you pay me something or have some special website, or I don't know. I feel like, you're like janefarrell.com, and everything I know is on there. When I know something else, I'll put it on there too. And I love that and appreciate that about you. And I do think that right off the bat with Leaders in Chamber, I think that's something that you just lead well in being so generous with your knowledge and your resources. So thank you for that.
I always say when people comment on that, it's all about the kids. That's what we're all here for, and we just want the best for them, and adults as well. We just want to share and support each other and them as much as we can.
Exactly.
I love that. Yeah.
Reduce it down to it's all about the kids. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. We're all here for the same reason. Yep. Well, speaking of kids, that was kind of one of the first things we wanted to ask you about was there a particular student in your career or that inspired you? Or maybe you thought, this is my why. This is the reason I'm doing this. Or I want to learn more because I want to do more for the student.
Yep. I guess it's not just a straight, simple line. I became interested in AAC because I found it endlessly fascinating, absorbing, help figuring out the best way for people to get their message across. And when I started in 1991, we were pretty bad at it. We didn't have good comprehensive AAC systems. We were still fiddling around with using lots of nouns, lots of object symbols, things like that. In about 1993, I went to work at a large special school in Melbourne. It was a physical disability special school, and you didn't have to have an intellectual disability to go there, just a physical disability. It's all changed now, but I met a young man called Nick, and Nick gave me a completely different perspective. Nick has the most amazing parents, Helen and Bob, and they terrified me because they knew more about AAC than I did, but also totally inspired me. So Nick was literate because his parents had not given up on that. I can honestly say I don't think he'd have become literate in the education system without his parents pushing, supporting. And then Nick had high-tech AAC. He had an Epson speech pack, it was called. And he was one of the very few people I'd worked with who actually had high-tech AAC. And that was his dad's passion. And Nick could spell, and he was a switch user, but he could say absolutely anything he wanted to say. And that made me realise that that was the holy grail.
Right.
If you can't speak, the ultimate flexibility is those 26 symbols that are the alphabet. They let you say anything you want to say. And then I started looking at what was happening in the school I was working with and we had a team of 5 speech pathologists, and I'd been working in the senior section up to that point. And we had a bit of a change of staff, and I was moved into working in some of the junior classrooms. And my mum was a primary school or elementary school principal, and I'd worked as a teacher aide in an elementary school when I was studying speech pathology. So I'd, had a fair exposure to education over the years.
Okay.
And in our junior section at that school, we had a class of students who didn't have intellectual disability. And the teacher in that classroom, her aim was for the students to read their names by the end of the year. And I was just horrified.
Right.
Every student we work with deserves more, but this was a group of kids where the plan was after 2 years that they would go to their local mainstream school after they'd been fully set up with, a kit of equipment and everything. And nothing was happening for them. And I would say to my mother, what are your, beginning of school students learning, and what are they doing?
Right.
Yeah. So I decided to go back and study teaching because I wanted to learn more about this, because I just kept getting told you can't. And I think, well, I know Nick, and by that stage I also knew many other people with complex communication needs who could read and write.
Right.
And even when I was studying, I had one lecturer ask me to leave his class because speech pathologists shouldn't be involved in literacy instruction. That was one of his big beliefs. And B, he thought I was absolutely crazy thinking that people without speech could learn to read and write.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, I can honestly say that my studies didn't teach me anywhere near as much as in 2000, I came over to the States for the AAC conference. It was in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, oh, well, I'll see what else is on while I'm there. And Karen Erickson and David Koppenhaver were running a literacy intensive in Minneapolis. So I went along to that, and I learned more in that course than I learned in all of my other studies.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and now they have written the Comprehensive Literacy for All, and you have resources around all of that on your website, and modules and things, and we've gone through those as well. And so it's so fun that you're side by side with those people now, working along.
I'm still learning from them all the time.
Oh yeah, we all are.
Yeah.
But I do have to say though, your modules are so great. Brenda and I both did them, and they're just, we've kind of felt like we're talking with you, which is exciting. Now we're actually talking with you, but really good examples. So I just want to put a plug out there for anybody listening.
Yeah, some people will say, well, because we do continuing ed, and they'll say, well, where do you get your continuing ed?
Right.
And here we have Closing the Gap and ATIA, which are national conferences in the States, and not Isaac is, just so people know, it's an international conference for AAC, and it alternates from Australia one year, right? And then anywhere in the US.
Rest of the world.
The rest of the world.
North America. Rest of the world, North America.
Oh, is that how it goes? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So the one coming up is in Mexico, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Will you be there?
Weirdly, that's the North American turn.
Will you be there?
No, I won't this time. It's the first one I've missed since 2000, I think. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'd already agreed to go to France and run an AAC camp. And they changed the dates for Isaac, and I just couldn't do both.
Well, an AAC camp in France sounds pretty spectacular.
So this is what's about that, though.
Yeah, we want to hear about that.
I have a couple questions about you, because I know that you do camps for kids, AAC users, but I have seen some posts about that look like you maybe do camps with teachers or special ed, like the adults, and that also looks like a camp kind of format, like a weekend kind of thing. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, so I no longer regularly run camps here. I got too old.
For kids, you mean?
Well, we don't have the same camp culture in Australia that you do. Okay. So camps here tend to be something you go to with your school, not something you go to in the summer holidays.
Okay.
Yeah. So I decided back in the early 2000s that I wanted to run an AAC camp, and I managed to get a grant and get that going. It was called Big Mouth Camp. I named it after my ex-husband. And right from the beginning. So I'd been involved in camps a lot through various things, including church, when I was younger.
Sure.
And I used to go to a learning disability camp when I was a speech pathology student.
Okay.
And the kids would come. It was more the American model. The kids would get dropped off. We'd take them off to camp. We'd do 5 days of activities and therapy, and then we'd bring them home. And I felt it was a really faulty model, because the parents really only got this quick handover at the end.
Okay.
So when I started Big Mouth Camp, it was with the intention that the whole family would come for the whole camp. So,
siblings and everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so that's what we did for 10 years. And while it was my idea, there are a number of people I couldn't have done it without, and particularly Helen Tage. And we were lucky enough to have Gail Porter come to about 5 or 6 of them as well.
Oh, wow.
We had lots of volunteers. Towards the end, the queue to volunteer was huge.
Oh, I bet.
And organisations were seeing it as PD for their staff. It was it really was fabulous. But I just decided it was I did it completely voluntarily, just ran it. It was huge. And I put it out there to see if anyone else wanted to take it on. Didn't have any takers, so it kind of stopped. Now what I do is, if people ask me to, I will run a camp. It's often schools. They'll ask me, and usually Helen, we tend to do it together, to come and run a camp on a weekend where the students come in for the weekend with their parents, and we all do activities together. And the aim is to get the parents much more, and siblings, everybody's welcome. If they're at a mainstream school, or if the special school that I'm working with is putting it on, then the staff, as many of the staff that will come, are welcome to come. And the aim is to get everybody much more fluent with modelling and feeling more competent with the students' AAC system. So
that's a great format for just collaborating and getting everybody on board with the same activities, and I'm sure it's fun for the kids.
Yes. We've had a go on.
Oh, well, it makes me realize that, so since there was no model like that, you're a like, I don't know, let's try it kind of person. Because you're not following someone else who's already been doing this, but it sounds like you have a partner in crime. And I feel like sometimes people that are kind of on the teetering of like, I don't know, we don't know what we're doing. You kind of have to have another person who's just as crazy as you are. So tell us about, what's her name?
Helen Tainch.
And what is her role?
So she's a speech pathologist as well.
Okay.
Helen and I went to university together.
Okay.
And we do lots together. So we're going to France together to run the camp over there. In April, we're going to the UK to run a 5-day literacy intensive course.
Oh.
So I work lots with her, and lots with Sally Clendon is the other person.
Okay.
So
I feel like that's part of the sustainability in this career, is to find your people. Because
your tribe.
Kind of trial. If you're doing something like AAC and Literacy, that's literally trial and error. And prior to maybe comprehensive literacy or Farrall book, there wasn't a book on it. There hasn't been a lot of resources, and you created resources, and you just were like, I don't know, let's try this. Oh, so that worked. Or I don't know, this is how neurotypical kids are learning to read. Why would that not also work for kids who aren't functionally verbal, right? So but it still felt so rogue that you're getting kicked out of classes. So you gotta find your people, or you're gonna burn out, because it's a hard road to toe, I'm sure.
Yeah. Although the passion just makes it easy, and the outcomes just make it easy. I have a few people, my tribe, that I talk to at nights and things like that. But it's like the explicit alphabet knowledge or the explicit alphabet instruction routine, whichever label you use with it. Karen and Dave came to Australia, I don't remember what year it was, and talked about that. And I hadn't heard about it before. It was a new thing they'd added, to what they were doing. And people went home and implemented the routine throughout their whole school. And so I work with a lot of special schools here. It doesn't mean I'm pro-segregation. It's just that's the group of people that want to work with me. And I love that we have now whole schools where everybody models AAC and walks around carrying AAC systems, etc., all the time. But people went home and tried implementing that whole school, and we very quickly found that for our most emergent students, the students who maybe only know a few letters of the alphabet, that it wasn't very effective. But once students knew half the alphabet, it was way more effective than what we'd been doing. And, I really appreciate, I fed that back to Karen, and she said, if that's what you're finding, that's what you keep doing. So, we're finding it more effective to work on 2 to 6 letters of the week with our really emergent students.
Right.
And then,
Right.
we just keep trying it and figuring out what works best.
What are some of your tricks to the trade to get buy-in? It sounds like people are coming to see you and then they go back and they actually do it. Tell us about that.
I am really lucky. So 2012 or 2011, I decided to work for myself. I was very lucky. In 2010, I met a couple of principals who wanted to start working with me across their whole school. One of them had done the literacy intensive with Karen and Dave. One of them was a teacher I used to work with who was now a principal, and they both wanted to employ me to support their whole school. So I did that, and we got great outcomes, and one of them was very good at getting the media to come to the school and chat, things like that.
Right.
Principals talk. So I would suddenly get a phone call or an email from another principal who'd heard from that principal. And at the same time, our curriculum model in Australia changed. So it used to be that special settings were basically choose their own adventure. We moved to having a national curriculum, and in theory, every school in the country follows that. And I would definitely say in theory. We have some states where that's very much followed through on and policed, and they're the states I work in the most. And we have other states that are still taking steps to getting that happening 10 years later.
Sure.
So, that's why I feel I've been very lucky, because in the states where it's been very clear from the education department it's not negotiable, those schools really wanted lots of support. How do we get this happening? That's, And then I honestly feel also I have worked as a school speech pathologist and as assistive technology assessor and, all of those different roles. In this role, because people pay for me, I feel like they value it more.
Right. Well, and I think also, you come and you show things and do things, and then they see success, right? They see our students are doing this. And as soon as you see that with a student, you can't not want to do that more, right?
So that's not everybody, but yes. And a big part of what I do, so when I go to a school, a lot of the schools just get their staff to do my online training now rather than having me come for a workshop. And then what I do is I go in and they just move me through classroom after classroom. So I will go to a classroom and model independent writing, or I'll go to a classroom and model comprehension instruction, or a classroom and model shared reading. And so it's doing it with their kids in their classroom with their set of, complications and positives and all of those things, which, is really helpful.
Which is different than just reading about it and trying to figure out how to make it work, but actually seeing someone do it with your own students. That's really good. We've talked to a lot of people about in our state and other places about that modeling and coaching type of training and what works. So it's always interesting to hear your perspective, your people's perspective on that. That's great.
Yes, I think that's much more effective than the workshops. I think you need the workshops so you've got some common language and some common understandings, but I was gobsmacked a few years ago. So Sally Clendon and I, or now Helen Taitch and I, run the 5-day courses here ourselves quite frequently. We still like to get Karen and Dave over every so often, but we'll run our own as well. And we had a lady sitting in the front row, nodding intelligently, asking great questions. And about 3 weeks later, I went to her school and I walked into her classroom, and it was clear it was babysitting, not teaching. And she said to me, loved your course, pity it doesn't apply to my students.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And yeah, that just blew me away because
Mm-hmm.
I presented case studies of kids similar to her
Mm-hmm.
students.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that unfortunately that exists, doesn't it? Um, um,
Well, I'm digressing from the planned question, but so don't, but but I noticed that you reposted about hand over hand on Friday. And that's
yes.
a classic example of something that I'm not sure ever worked. Research is showing
Yep.
probably never did, and
Yep.
continues to go on. And we say it in classes, and everyone nods. And you go to the classroom, and it's still being done.
Yep.
And for those that don't know, she posted a like a graphic. And by the way, I printed that, Jane. It was 5 feet long, like literally.
Yeah.
It's the length of my door, and I had it up in my practice. Since the day you put that out, I noticed that the Friday was a revised version of it. So
Yep.
because it needed to hang there to be for anybody and everybody who came into that room, including parents, including nurses, including paraeducators, including, right?
And
Yep.
SLPs, right?
Including
Yep.
SLPs.
Yep.
But I mean, those are some things that I think. So tell us a little bit about why do you think people still do that?
Oh, I really don't know. I think so the update last week was because someone had put on, I apologize, I can't remember their name, but I've acknowledged them in the update. Someone had put on Insta about an article they'd read. It's 25 years old, I think. And it says in the article, so they compared passive modelling, where they just modelled the task to the students, with verbal prompting and hand over hand. And they found that the most effective technique was passive modelling for kids to learn the task. And this was students with moderate to severe intellectual disability, I think.
So they're comparing modeling to hand over hand. Is that right?
Yes. And,
okay.
And they also compared the, like step-by-step verbal prompting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the most effective was modelling.
Right. 25 years ago.
Yeah. Yep. And they say in the summary, I put it in my blog post, I think, we suggest that this commonly used technique in education is going, we need to rethink and revise and change and move away from this. And I'm just like, yeah. And 25 years later, we're still saying this.
Right.
The article's free to download. It was only put up online about 2016. And they link to some other articles in there that have shown the same outcome. And it's just scary that we've known that for that long. It's a bit like symbol-supported text. Why does it keep coming up when we've got research back to the 60s for that one showing that it doesn't work? It's got to be, I don't know, Sally Clendon was talking at one point about she'd been reading some research about what impacts your practice as a speech pathologist. And, or in New Zealand, they say speech language therapist. She found that your first job in many ways has, and the practices and understandings of the people around you has more, and excuse me, Sally, if I'm misquoting you, but it had more impact on your what you did with your practice than your degree almost.
Oh, wow.
Your first job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the thing, is we work with a lot of people who come into special education who've had little or no special education training, particularly paraprofessionals. But a lot of the teachers I work with may or may not have had special education training either. And even the ones that have, it may not have been very informative for their job.
Sure.
And then you go into an environment where everybody is using hands up, hand over hand. And so you think perhaps that this is what we're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I have started working with a new school last year in Sydney, and they use a lot of LAMP, and LAMP promotes hand over hand in its training for LAMP.
Mm-hmm.
And they were using hand over hand in virtually everything else as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a staff meeting where I talked about what a problem this was for
Mm-hmm.
autonomy and other reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And the kickback actually mostly came from the school's speech pathologist.
Yeah.
Because
sometimes we can be the worst.
Yeah, because she'd been to all the LAMP training where it
Mm-hmm.
was really promoted.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so she was coming from a really strong position of concern that AAC wasn't going to be as effective if we didn't do this. And so I think that's another reason that hand over hand continues, is we do have approaches that often things that are based on the principles of ABA or come from that area, where hand over hand is actually seen as a really valid technique. So you have a mix of it's just happening and everyone's doing it, so I must have to do it too, through to this is what I've been trained in, this works.
Right.
Right.
You know, it makes me think about what you were just, that story you're sharing, thinking of leaders and change makers, you know, and what you said about what you found with the alphabetic knowledge, the work that you had done in schools, and you talked to Karen Erickson, you know, that's brave, right? You're talking to them and saying, look, this is what I found, and I'm doing this work, and then being brave, going into like maybe a setting where the hand over hand is happening. You know, we have to be brave and talk to people about what we know and what research says. I think that might be, you're onto something with that, as the change maker, right? Being brave to do these things and empowering others, you know, because like you mentioned, our paraeducators who may not have the same training in special education, but they are with the students all the time and doing such important work.
And they just want to help. They just are the most amazing people who just want to help.
Yeah, if you want to make change, train your paraeducators. I mean, that's the where, you know, and then there's systematic limitations, at least in the US, on training time for paraeducators, and how do you provide all of that? But I think Sarah makes a good point where you have to go, well, I'm trying this and it's not exactly the way Erickson said, so I'm gonna open that dialogue. I'm gonna email her. I'm gonna ask her that. I love that, because what I think is us little people feel like you all are you know, that it's going to be a stupid question, or that you're going to roll your eyes, or you're going to have, oh my gosh, where do I begin, or you know what I'm saying. But I actually feel like you know, there's a void of ongoing mentorship in our field of, okay, here's where I got. And here are the few kiddos that aren't getting past this barrier. And where, you know, like, how do we create an environment where we have people that we are brainstorming with that can, you know, that can go, well, have you thought of this? Did you try that? You know, and they're not so stuck on the way that they're selling it, the way that they're, you know, right, the way that they've been packaged. It's like, well, you have to do this, and you have to, it's like, because it sounds like Erickson said, if that's working, keep doing it. I mean, you know, I love that, because
she was really great. Yeah.
You know, she's empowering you. Like, I love that you're using your own critical thinking here. You're managing this. That's how you're coming up with new solutions. And that is how you stay creative. That is how you stay innovative, you know, is permission to do it your way. But then have that feedback from someone who you respect, say, keep going, you know. Do you get a lot of people that reach out to you?
In Australia, yes. Sometimes from other countries, but it's hard to fit it in with time differences and things like that. So, yeah. Sally Clendon and I went to the UK about 10 years ago and ran a literacy intensive, and I've stayed in touch with a lot of the people from that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been, that was an awesome course. So, it's things like that. But I have people approach me to formally mentor them, but last year I just had to start saying no. I just got too much on my plate.
You are a busy woman. When I look at your blog or what's happening, you're all over.
Yeah.
You're all over doing a lot of good work. We were talking about mindsets, and one question we were curious to ask you is, what mindset or systematic hangups do we need to avoid to stay creative? We kind of talked about that a little bit. Staying creative and solving problems to keep us moving forward in this field.
I think constantly maintaining that belief that every student can full stop. And then problem solving around that. I love the participation model from Miranda and Buchelman, and the way it talks about barriers, but also the way it talks about today and tomorrow. So, in that model, we're asked to consider access barriers and opportunity barriers. And I think that's a really great way to think about it, because we're often fixated on the access barriers because they're a little more solvable. The opportunity barriers are things like attitudes and the knowledge of people around the individual that are a lot harder to solve. But until we tackle those, we're not going to get the change that we need to see. And then that mindset of today and tomorrow, I has actually been really helpful to a lot of people. John is where he is today, and this is what we need to do to keep supporting John. So maybe John is communicating with behaviour, facial expression, body language, all of those things today. What do we want for John tomorrow? And then what do we need to put in place for tomorrow to happen? And tomorrow is not tomorrow. Tomorrow is a point in the future. But it's acknowledging that he's where he's at today and the things that you're doing are awesome. And maybe we can tweak things a little bit to help today be easier. But we need tomorrow to be kept in our sights and moving towards tomorrow at all times. And I just think that headset is incredibly important.
I love that.
I'm way to look at that.
Yes, write this down, everybody, as you're listening. I can just imagine people we've talked to, and this is just a gold nugget, and it makes so much sense, right? Yeah, that is wonderful.
Yeah, it's a gentle way to say that we accept everyone as they are, and we also know that we haven't reached full potential here, right? That there's a competency that we have not yet achieved, right? So,
and then you're bringing it back to the kids, just like you said. We love that's what this is about.
Yeah. What advice do you have for people wanting to help the field grow?
Oh, gosh. I guess be honest.
Love that.
Don't keep doing the same thing if it's not working. Be honest and say, this isn't working. There's got to be another way. There's got to be a better way. There's got to be a more inclusive way. There's got to be... We've got to be able to reach everybody, and this model isn't doing that.
Are there things, Jane, that you can think of just off the bat of times where you've had to be honest that you could share with us?
As I said, I get employed a lot to work with schools, and so I will go in and work with a whole school It's usually principal led, and you were saying before about how do I get people to accept this and implement it. Huge advantage having the boss,
Right.
you know, on
Right.
that, on the same wavelength. There have been times where the school has employed me for different reasons. So there's definitely been times where multiple schools in an area have employed me, gone to a principal's meeting and raved about it, and then another school has contacted me. And when I get to that school, it's clear that it's more about they want the outcome without putting in the work, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Easy solution.
yeah, and also, oh, well, that school's got these great outcomes because they've got Jane Farrell. So if we have Jane Farrell, we'll, get those great outcomes. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, that's happened 3 or 4 times, and I've had to be very honest with those schools about it's not about, it's I guess when I've worked with students, it's equivalent to the parents that want to buy the most expensive AAC but not actually model it.
Yeah.
So it's not about money, it's about time, it's about change of attitude, it's about all of the practices that we have to put in place.
Right.
And so yeah, it's saying to schools, this is a journey, it's not a holiday.
Right. Right. Right.
I mean, are there some guiding principles that you use that, even that you used before the iPad? And like I feel like, people coming into the field now, I had someone say, if the pictures don't come in the message window, they're never going to use the device. I've never seen a kid use the device that didn't have the pictures in the message window. And I was like, well, that's because you've been in practice for 6 months and you've only seen, touch chat or protocol, like it's the limited experience piece. But I mean, are there things that, so it's like for those that haven't seen how far AAC has come, right? And so you can say, oh, honey, I remember when the printout came from the Liberator, like a little piece of paper. They somehow learned to do it without a message window at all. Like there are things that I think people coming into the field think are guiding principles because it's what all AAC devices maybe have that they've seen, but those aren't really the guiding principles, right? So it's like, what are things that regardless, AAC in the beginning, which by the way, we may still be in. We might still be in AAC infancy. I kind of hope we are.
We've come a long way in 30 years, but gosh, we've got a long way to go. Yeah,
we do. And I kind of hope we are in the infancy because I want it to be so much better. But are there things that like I'm always saying when I do consults with schools and they're like, oh, do we need a different app, a better app? Kind of like the parent thing, right? And it's like, no, you can actually love the one you're with. Like you actually can. You can actually just make any of them work, really, if they can access it.
And if it's a good vocabulary set too.
Yeah, if it's complete.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So years ago, 2012, I was involved in a study which we published in Perspectives in AAC. It was at a school here in Australia, obviously, and the principal at the school decided that she would put the 5 or 6 students in the school who had AAC in the one class and figure out if that led to better outcomes, because when they were scattered through the school, it just ended up in cupboards and didn't get used.
Okay.
So that was her original premise. I went in to support the class and I was horrified. So it was every single one of the students had Pro Quota Go on an iPad. So it's very early in the days of the iPad. Each of them had ended up with Pro Quota Go on an iPad for different reasons. One of them had actually had an assistive technology assessment and had got it as part of the assessment. The others had, the others had it. I think my favourite was the gardener at the school had seen like 60 Minutes or
the
yeah.
2020. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and suggested that Pro Quo might be good for this particular student who used to come out and help him a lot. So they all had it for different reasons, parent-driven, whatever.
Sure.
And it was back when Pro Quo Go's vocabulary was that incredible mishmash of it just wasn't very robust.
Right. That was Pro Quo's infancy for sure.
Yeah, yeah, before crescendo. So we started off the year. I wasn't involved, so it was the school speech pathologist supported them for the first 10 weeks. And then she left for another job, I think, and the principal asked me if I would take it on. And I was incredibly lucky because about 4 weeks later, Crescendo came out, and I just went,
yeah.
Because that early Pro Quo to go was incredibly hard to, get good communication
but that's what you were working with.
Yeah.
And so now, this has come to you.
Yeah. So we rolled Crescendo out straight away. What they'd been doing in term 1 was they had programmed a number of specific pages. So when the school speech pathologist was working with them, they programmed a number of specific pages for situations like going to the lunch cafeteria place and buying stuff, and morning group. And my favourite example of this was, in fact, the morning group, where the teacher would say to the students, how are you feeling today? They'd all go to the morning group page and they'd say happy or sad or whatever. So I said, right, this is going to stop. We're just going to model it. This is now a good vocabulary. You should just be able to use it all day, every day. And to me, that's the defining thing. If you can use it to talk with, then the kids can use it to talk with. And so if you do get an app that you can't use to model, there's a very good chance it's not going to be suitable for the kids to use to communicate with either.
Right.
So that's, to me, as a really, defining thing. If I can't model with it, how are the kids going to learn to use it? And some apps do take some training before you can learn to model with them. But, putting that aside, once you've had that training, if you need it, if you can model with it, then we're good to go.
Right.
By the end of the year, so the teacher and the teacher aide took that on board. We got more and more modelling happening, and I was there about every 4 weeks. So I would go in, check how things are going. We'd have a chat. Off we go. They did all the hard work. By the end of the year, I was there, and the teacher was running morning group, which had completely changed from earlier in the year. Don't get me started on traditional special ed morning circle.
I do want to hear it, but yes, tell the story.
So end of the year, I'm sitting there. It's, nearly time for summer break. And the teacher says to the students, how are you feeling? And one of them says, navigates to feelings and says, great. And the teacher says, why? And he says, goes off and he names another student, and then he says birthday and party. And she goes, yes, we are having a party for his birthday today, aren't we? And then, they have a bit of a chat about what might be at the party, and he tells her dancing. I've got all of this on video. I love watching it. And then there's another student, and she says, and how are you feeling? And this other student hasn't participated in the discussion about the party. Everyone else is saying, and cake and, things like that. And this one student's sitting off to the side, and she says to her, and how are you feeling? And she goes, tired.
Oh.
And then she goes, very. And then really.
Dramatic.
Yeah, but it's just that change from going into the morning circle page and telling the teacher something that was not necessarily accurate or true, and no further discussion, to being able to have a robust discussion about how everybody's feeling and associating their feelings with their feelings too.
Right. Something meaningful and real. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So I think in terms of, you know, overriding principles, if you can't use the language system, how can the kids use it? And it's you're right. If it's a good system, we can make it work as long as the student can access it. So there's no, you know, it's not like we're gonna. I've worked with kids who have, I'm sure you have too, who have 4 systems on their iPad. Because people are always looking for the next system to be the magic or the easy one. But it's about our implementation.
And giving it time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think too, accepting what they give you instead of requiring an I want statement, or instead of requiring some kind of sentence structure that looks that looks like written language or looks like verbal language written down, right? Like it, like I think it's like taking what they give you as authentic communication, you know, and not questioning that. I think one of the principal beliefs I feel like is that I believe you. If you tell me something on your device, I believe you. And I mean, instead of what I get all the time, especially with alternative access, is, did they mean to say that? Especially when they've said something profound. They
or
said something that's right on target, and everyone's so surprised. They say, do you think they meant to do that? And I go, what is the harm in believing that they meant to?
I was working with a student who was using partner-assisted scanning with a pod book, and she was doing a writing sample, doing writing with me. We called it a writing sample because it was the end of year assessment. So she and I were doing writing. Her teacher was there as well, and she's using partner-assisted scanning with her pod book, and she said, more to say, let's do something else. Visit. So let's do something else takes you to the activities page or the places page. Visit mum. And I said, because this was a writing sample and I was not being flexible about this, I said, oh, you're going to write, you want to visit mum. And again, got this on video. And when I pull out the flip chart to try and make it right, she just lets me know. Rah, 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 rah.
Yeah.
I was telling you, I want to do something else. And then the teacher who was in the room and videoing interrupts and says, actually, mum's here at the moment for a meeting with the principal. So you go, oh, okay. So we told people that story, and a lot of people didn't necessarily believe us. It was really significant for that student to have done all of that. She was still learning partner-assisted scanning. And then the following year, I was working with her, and it was a parent open day. So school was just happening and parents were wandering in and out, watching in the classrooms. It's not something lots of schools do, but this particular school did it. And I said to the student, what are you going to write about? So same thing, I'm writing with her again and using her pod. She said, more to say, I'm telling you something. Then she chose days and times, Thursday, back to categories, activities, not turn the page, swimming. So Thursday, not swimming. And I said, oh, you're not going swimming on Thursday. And one of the staff overheard and said, yes, she is. Swimming's not been cancelled. And then this other voice behind us said, in the car this morning, this is her mum. So her mum's been watching. In the car this morning, her hydrotherapy person called and said it was cancelled on Thursday.
Oh, she was sharing her news. And how important to have mom there.
To validate that.
And everyone just went, oh.
Wow.
Wow. The end game is that they communicate something that we don't already know, right? And that's the other thing I think about. So we model, and then we ask them and we engage and we believe what they have to say, instead of the find this, find that, which isn't communication, it's testing. We're not teaching anything, and it's nothing they want to say. So it's like, but then if we're going to leave it open-ended, then we got to believe it when they say it too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And
Yeah.
also, I always remember David Buchanan talking about small talk many, many, many years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And he'd had a PhD student reviewing, research into how much of what we say every day is small talk, and then how much she found a study where 5-year-olds spent 11% of their day making stuff up.
Oh,
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes
So
sense.
if neurotypical verbal 5-year-olds can spend 11% of their day making stuff up, why can't other kids?
And who are we to stop them from that, right?
Yeah.
There's a standard saying from kindergarten teachers here that they say, I'll believe 50% about what your kid says about you to the parents. If you only believe 50% of what they say about me.
Yeah, no kidding.
I just do that too. I said, hey, at this age, truth telling is about 80%. So, you can't have a higher bar. Oh, that's so funny.
Jane, I'm sure Brenda feels this way too. I think I could talk to you all night.
Yes.
Well, it's night for us. It's morning for you.
Oh, good.
And by the way, I'm going to be wearing red tomorrow. I'm loving your headband and your glasses. And, it's inspirational, especially here in Seattle. It's dark and rainy right now. So,
it would be.
But we do want to end with a question, for you. Is there something people might not know about you that you want to share, or it could be maybe a new project.
Get to that one. I love gardening.
Okay. What kind of things do you do with your garden?
Oh,
you do vegetables?
No, I mostly do flowers. I love flowers. Yeah.
Okay.
I saw that question on the list you sent through, and I just thought, I don't know what to say to that one. I feel like I'm an open book. It's all about the kids, and it's about best outcomes for everybody. And the more that we can share that and support that and help each other, the better.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what Brenda said about your resources, just plentiful resources just available. That's what we should be doing, helping each other, help these kids, and making things available.
And you asked me about my blog earlier. I forgot to say I have a secondary website, comprehensiveliteracy.com, as well. So
yes. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
We have it bookmarked.
And when you started to describe at the beginning of the podcast where you live, I feel like if we do a follow-up, we should come to you.
Totally.
Lovely. And now to find out you have flowers all over, that sounds magical.
Yes.
I hope to meet you in person sometime, Jane. I really do. I don't know. You're lovely. You are so inspirational. I don't think you even know your reach. I don't think you have any idea how many people use your resources. And even like I said, even when I did that program for a year, 2017, I think maybe I don't know if I'm right on the timeline, but somewhere around 2017 when you came out with all that stuff. I did it with kids who were in preschool, and then they were going into preschool, and some of them going into kindergarten here, and they could say, well, they have 66 sight words, and everyone's blown away, right? And the thing about literacy is, if you know your letters and you have sight words and you're coming into kindergarten, you better get general ed instruction, because you already met the bar of everybody else coming into that school. Yep. And so the thing about kids coming in with literacy skills is they get the placement that they need for further instruction. And that is also the holy grail, right? And we always talk about, you can't talk about Dumbledore unless you know how to spell it, because it's not in any AAC device, right? You have to be able to spell. So I 100% believe everything in your belief system, and I follow you for that reason. And the very little success I've had is due to you and your resources as well. So thank you so much.
That's very kind.
Yeah. Thank you. And you're so easy to talk to and open, and we really appreciate you just hopping on and having this fun conversation with us.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Okay, bye.